My name is Angela Price, and I've been a corporate attorney for 15 years, working my way up from a scholarship kid from the south side of Chicago to senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. I'm telling you this not to brag, but because what happened to me at Rosie's diner on that Tuesday afternoon in March had nothing to do with who I actually was, and everything to do with what someone decided I must be the moment they looked at my skin. I remember every detail of that day with the kind of clarity that comes from trauma, the way your brain preserves moments of profound humiliation in perfect, painful detail. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, that dead zone between lunch and dinner when most restaurants are quiet. I had just left the courthouse after winning a major case for one of our biggest clients, a pharmaceutical company being sued for patent infringement. I should have been celebrating with my team at one of the upscale restaurants downtown where we usually went, but I'd had a migraine building all morning, the kind that makes fluorescent lights feel like ice picks behind your eyes, and I just wanted something simple and quiet before heading back to the office to start on the mountain of paperwork that comes with any victory. Rosie's Diner was a place I'd driven past 1,000 times on my way home, one of those vintage-looking establishments that seemed frozen in time, all chrome and red vinyl and promises of home-style cooking. I'd never stopped there before, usually preferring the restaurants closer to my high-rise condo in the Gold Coast, but something about it called to me that day. Maybe it was nostalgia for the kind of simple, honest food my grandmother used to make before she passed. Maybe it was just exhaustion making me crave comfort. Whatever it was, I pulled my Mercedes into the parking lot and walked through that door, not knowing that the next hour would unravel something fundamental in me. The place was nearly empty. There was an older white couple in a booth near the window, finishing their coffee. A construction worker sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone while eating a burger. The smell of frying onions and fresh bread hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt myself relax. This was exactly what I needed. I chose a booth in the middle of the dining room, setting my leather briefcase on the seat beside me and my phone on the table. I was wearing one of my favorite suits, a charcoal gray Armani that had cost more than my first car, with a silk blouse underneath and my grandmother's pearl earrings. My hair was pulled back in the neat bun I always wore to court, and I just had my nails done that weekend, a subtle French manicure that looked professional without being flashy. I mention all this because I want you to understand. I looked exactly like what I was. A successful professional woman taking a break from a demanding job. There was nothing about my appearance that should have triggered what happened next, except for the one thing I couldn't change and wouldn't want to, the color of my skin. A waitress approached, young, maybe 22 or 23, with blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail and the kind of heavily contoured makeup that's popular on social media. Her name tag said Brittany. She didn't smile when she reached my table, didn't offer the cheerful greeting I'd heard her give the construction worker minutes before. "What do you want?" she asked, not quite making eye contact. I was used to microaggressions. 15 years in corporate law, being one of only 3 black partners in a firm of 47, you develop a thick skin. You learn to choose your battles, so I ignored her tone and smiled politely. "Could I get a coffee, please? And I'd like to see a menu." She sighed, actually sighed, like I'd asked her to climb a mountain. "We're out of coffee." I glanced at the coffee pot visible behind the counter, clearly full, steam rising from it. "That coffee right there? That's old. We're making fresh." She said it in a way that made it clear no fresh coffee would be coming anytime soon. "Okay, I'll just have water then, and the menu, please." Another sigh. She walked away without acknowledging my request, and I watched as she went behind the counter and started talking to another server, a young man with red hair and freckles whose name tag read Connor. They were both looking at me and laughing, not even trying to hide it. Something cold settled in my stomach, that familiar feeling of being othered, of being made to feel like you don't belong in a space that should be public and welcoming to everyone. But I'd dealt with worse. I'd given presentations to rooms full of hostile executives who didn't think a Black woman belonged in their boardrooms. I'd stared down opposing counsel who tried to intimidate me with racist dog whistles and condescending tones. I could handle 2 ignorant kids in a diner. Brittany eventually returned with a menu, practically throwing it on the table, water sloshing over the rim of the glass she'd brought. "There." I ordered a club sandwich and fries, keeping my voice level and polite. She wrote it down without a word and walked away. I pulled out my phone and started responding to emails, trying to ignore the knot of tension building in my shoulders. The food took 45 minutes. 45 minutes for a sandwich in an almost empty restaurant. I watched Connor take orders from 2 new customers who'd come in after me, watched their food come out within 15 minutes. I watched Brittany refill the construction worker's coffee 3 times, chatting and laughing with him. And I sat there, being professionally ignored, my migraine getting worse with each passing minute. When Brittany finally brought my food, the sandwich was cold, the bread slightly stale, the fries lukewarm and limp. It looked like it had been sitting under a heat lamp for half an hour, which it probably had. "This is cold," I said quietly, still trying to be reasonable. "That's how it comes," Brittany said with a shrug. "I'd like it fresh, please, and hot." She rolled her eyes so dramatically I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "I'll have to charge you for another one. You'll charge me for food that should have been hot in the first place. Not my problem you took too long to eat it. I haven't eaten any of it. You just brought it." We were starting to attract attention now. The older couple was watching. The construction worker had turned around on his stool. Connor was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, smirking. "Look," Brittany said, her voice dripping with condescension, "if you can't afford to pay for food, maybe you should eat somewhere else." The insult hung in the air between us. The assumption that I, sitting there in a suit that cost more than she probably made in a month, driving a car worth more than a year of her wages, couldn't afford a $12 sandwich. The assumption based on nothing but the color of my skin. I felt something crack inside me, some reserve of patience and professionalism I'd been drawing on for 15 years. "I'd like to speak to your manager." "She's not here." "Then who is in charge right now?" Brittany exchanged a look with Connor, and they both smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "I guess I am," she said. "Then I'm telling you as a paying customer that I want my food hot and fresh or I want a refund. And I'm telling you that's not going to happen." She crossed her arms, mimicking Connor's posture. You people are always trying to get free food. Coming in here, making demands, expecting special treatment. You people. There it was, out in the open now, no more pretense of customer service or professional courtesy. Just plain, simple racism from a girl young enough to be my daughter. I stood up slowly, gathering my briefcase and phone. I'm leaving. I'm not paying for this. The hell you're not. Brittany's voice rose, shrill and angry. Connor, she's trying to dine and dash. This was escalating in a way I'd never experienced before. In boardrooms, I could shut down racism with logic and legal threats. In professional settings, there were HR departments and company policies. But here, in this small diner with only a handful of witnesses, I suddenly felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't since I was a teenager dealing with my first encounters with overt discrimination. I'm not dining and dashing. I didn't eat anything. The food is cold and the service has been discriminatory from the moment I walked in. Connor moved to block the door. He was bigger than me, younger, and he had that look in his eyes that said he was enjoying this. You need to pay before you leave. Get out of my way. My lawyer voice, the one I used in court, the one that had made opposing counsel back down and judges pay attention. He didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone. I'm calling the cops. We got someone trying to steal food. My heart started pounding. I knew exactly how this could go. I'd seen the videos, read the news stories. Black people arrested for being in spaces while black. Black people humiliated, brutalized, killed over misunderstandings and racist assumptions. I was a lawyer. I knew my rights. But I also knew that rights didn't always protect you when the wrong people decided you were a threat. I'm not stealing anything. Move out of my way. Now. That's when Brittany picked up the glass of soda from my table, the one I'd ordered when I finally got tired of waiting for water, and threw it in my face. The liquid hit me like a slap, cold and shocking. It soaked into my hair, my face, my expensive suit. Ice cubes bounced off my chest and clattered to the floor. And the sound that came from Brittany and Connor was pure, delighted laughter. Oops, Brittany said, not even trying to sound sincere. My hand slipped. I stood there, dripping, humiliated, furious beyond words. The older couple was staring in horror. The construction worker had his phone out, recording, and these two kids were laughing at me like I was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Something happened in that moment that I'm not proud of. All the professionalism, all the composure I'd built up over 15 years, it just evaporated. I lunged at Brittany, not even sure what I intended to do, just knowing that I needed to make her understand that she couldn't treat people like this, that there had to be consequences. Connor grabbed me before I reached her, his hands rough on my arms, and suddenly I was being restrained, held back while Brittany stood there smirking, and all I could think was that this couldn't be happening, not to me, not after everything I'd worked for and achieved and overcome. Get your hands off me, I screamed, and I heard my voice break, heard the tears I was trying to hold back. Somebody call the police, Connor yelled. This crazy woman is attacking us. The construction worker was still recording. The older couple looked terrified. And I was being held by a stranger, soaking wet with soda, being called crazy, being made into exactly the stereotype these people had assumed I was from the moment I walked in. That's when the door opened. A woman walked in, probably in her late 50s, with steel gray hair cut short and sharp blue eyes that took in the scene immediately. She was dressed simply, jeans and a flannel shirt, but there was something about the way she carried herself that commanded attention. "What the hell is going on here?" Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Connor's grip on me loosened slightly. "Ms. Chen, this woman tried to leave without paying and then attacked Brittany." Ms. Chen. The owner, I realized. The actual owner of Rosie's diner, whose name was apparently not Rosie. She looked at me, taking in my soaked suit, my tear-stained face, the ice cubes still scattered on the floor. Then she looked at Brittany, whose smirk had faded into something more uncertain. Then at Connor, still holding my arms. "Connor, let her go, now." He released me, and I stumbled slightly, my legs shaking from adrenaline and humiliation. Ms. Chen walked slowly around the diner, her eyes moving from the cold food sitting on my table to the coffee pot behind the counter to her 2 employees. "Someone want to tell me the truth about what happened here. She came in demanding free food," Brittany started, but Ms. Chen held up a hand. "I wasn't asking you yet." She turned to the construction worker. "Sir, you've been here the whole time. What did you see?" He looked uncomfortable, glancing between Brittany and Connor and me. But to his credit, he told the truth. "The lady came in, sat down real polite. Brittany was rude to her from the start, wouldn't bring her coffee even though there was plenty, made her wait forever for food. When she complained the food was cold, Brittany got nasty with her. Then when she tried to leave, they blocked her and Brittany threw a drink on her. I have video," he added, holding up his phone, "of the drink throwing and after, started recording when things got heated." Ms. Chen nodded slowly. She turned to the older couple. "You folks see the same thing?" The old man nodded. "That young lady didn't do anything wrong. Your staff treated her terribly. We were about to leave ourselves. We don't want to eat in a place that treats people like that." Ms. Chen's face had gone very still, very cold. She looked at Brittany and Connor for a long moment, and I saw them both start to squirm. "My office, both of you, right now." "But Ms. Chen," Brittany started. I said now. They slunk away behind the counter and through a door marked private. Ms. Chen turned to me, and her expression softened just slightly. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry for what happened here. This is inexcusable, and I want you to know it does not represent what this establishment stands for. Would you please wait just a few minutes? I need to deal with this situation, and then I'd like to speak with you properly." I should have left. I should have walked out with whatever dignity I had left and never looked back. But something in her voice, something genuine and angry and ashamed, made me nod. "I'll wait." She disappeared into the office, and I stood there in the middle of the diner, still dripping, still shaking, while the construction worker approached me cautiously. "Hey, I'm sorry that happened to you. That was messed up. I sent you the video if you want to press charges or anything." He showed me his phone, where he'd airdropped the footage to a contact file with my name that I must have unconsciously accepted. "Thank you," I managed. "Thank you for speaking up. Seemed like the right thing to do." He paid his bill and left, and the older couple did the same, the woman squeezing my hand as she passed and whispering, "You hold your head high, dear." I was alone in the diner when the shouting started from the office. I couldn't make out words, but Ms. Chen's voice was clear and furious. It went on for maybe 10 minutes before the door opened and Brittany and Connor emerged, both of them red-faced. Brittany was crying. They didn't look at me as they gathered their things from behind the counter. They didn't say anything as they walked past me toward the door. But just before Brittany left, Ms. Chen's voice stopped her. "Give me your keys, both of you." They handed over key rings and then they were gone, and it was just me and Ms. Chen in the empty diner. She locked the front door, flipped the sign to "closed," and then turned to face me. "Please sit. Let me get you some towels, get you cleaned up." She brought out a stack of clean kitchen towels and a first aid kit, like she thought I might be physically hurt. In a way, I was, just not in any way bandages could fix. "My name is Susan Chen," she said as I dabbed ineffectively at my ruined suit. "I've owned this diner for 30 years. Bought it from the original Rosie when I was 28 years old, fresh off the boat from Taiwan with more ambition than sense. Rosie took a chance on me, sold it to me for half what it was worth because she said she liked my dumplings and trusted me to take care of her legacy." She sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table. "I have worked every single day for 3 decades to make this place welcoming to everyone. Everyone. I don't care what color you are, where you're from, how much money you have. You come to my diner, you get treated with respect, and you get good food. That's the promise I made to Rosie, and it's the promise I've kept." Her voice broke slightly. "Until today, until I hired 2 people who I thought were just young and needed guidance, and instead they turned out to be something I can't tolerate. Bigots. Cruel, small-minded bigots who used my establishment to hurt someone." "It's not your fault," I said, surprised to hear myself defending her. "You weren't here. It is my fault. I hired them. I trained them. I created an environment where they thought that behavior was acceptable, and I am so sorry." She pulled out a business card and slid it across to me. "This is my lawyer. I want you to sue me. Sue this establishment. Take us for everything we've got if that's what it takes to make this right." I stared at the card, then at her. "You want me to sue you? I want you to have justice. I want there to be consequences. Those 2 kids, I fired them on the spot, but that's not enough. You were assaulted in my restaurant. You were discriminated against. You deserve compensation, and more than that, you deserve to know that this matters, that there are real repercussions." I started laughing, and once I started, I couldn't stop. It was slightly hysterical, the laughter of someone who'd been wound too tight for too long. Here was this woman, this stranger, offering me exactly what I'd wanted moments ago: validation, consequences, justice, and I didn't know what to do with it. "I'm a lawyer," I finally managed to say. "Corporate law mostly, but I know my way around a discrimination suit. I could bury you. I could take this diner and everything you've worked for." "I know," she said simply, "and I wouldn't blame you if you did." We sat there in silence for a long moment. My suit was ruined. My dignity was in tatters. My migraine was now a full-blown assault on my brain. But something about Susan Chen's absolute sincerity, her willingness to accept consequences and make things right, took the edge off my anger. "I don't want to sue you," I heard myself say. "I want a hot meal and an apology, which I've already got. And I want to know that those 2 will never work in food service again. They won't if I have anything to say about it. I'm reporting what happened to every restaurant association I'm part of. And I'm going to suggest you file a police report for assault." "Will it do any good?" She hesitated. "Honestly, probably not. The system is broken, but it will create a record. And maybe it will make them think twice before they do something like this to someone else. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Susan stood and went into the kitchen. I heard the sound of cooking, and 15 minutes later she emerged with a plate. A perfect club sandwich, fries that were actually crispy and hot, a side of coleslaw, and a piece of apple pie. "On the house," she said. "And before you say anything, this isn't trying to buy you off or make you sign anything. This is me, as one human being to another, trying to offer a small gesture of comfort after a horrible experience." The food was delicious. The best club sandwich I'd ever had, if I'm being honest. We sat there together, Susan nursing a cup of coffee while I ate, and she told me her story. How she'd come to America with nothing, how she'd worked her way up from dishwasher to cook to owner. How she'd faced her own discrimination, her own struggles as an Asian immigrant in a predominantly white neighborhood. How she'd built this place into a community institution, serving everyone from construction workers to judges, from teenagers on first dates to families celebrating birthdays. "I've seen this neighborhood change so much," she said, "and mostly for the better. We're more diverse now, more open, but there's still so much ugliness lurking under the surface. People like Brittany and Connor, they grew up with this poison, learned it from their parents or their friends or the internet, and they spread it wherever they go. How do you fight it?" I asked. "How do you keep believing in people when they keep disappointing you?" She smiled sadly. "You just keep showing up. You keep trying. You keep making your little corner of the world as good as you can make it, and you hope it's enough." I finished my meal, and she packed up another piece of pie for me to take home. She gave me her personal cell phone number and made me promise to call if I needed anything, if I changed my mind about pressing charges, if I just needed to talk to someone who understood. As I was leaving, she stopped me one more time. "I want to tell you something. What happened today, it wasn't about you. It wasn't about anything you did or didn't do, anything you wore or said, or how you carried yourself. It was about two broken people with hatred in their hearts taking it out on someone they saw as vulnerable. But you're not vulnerable. You're strong. You walked in here with your head high, and I want you to leave the same way." I nodded, blinking back tears that I'd been holding in for over an hour. "Thank you." I drove home in my soda-soaked suit and called in sick for the rest of the day, which I never did. I took a long shower and cried properly, the kind of crying that comes from a deep well of accumulated pain and frustration and exhaustion. Not just from today, but from 15 years of microaggressions and casual racism, and having to be twice as good to get half as far. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment Brittany threw that drink in my face, kept feeling Connor's hands on my arms, kept hearing my own voice screaming in a way I never allowed myself to scream in professional settings. I felt ashamed. Ashamed that I'd lost my composure, ashamed that I'd been humiliated, ashamed that I'd let them reduce me to a stereotype. But as the night wore on and dawn started to break over the Chicago skyline visible from my bedroom window, something shifted. The shame started to transform into something else. Anger, yes, but also determination. Clarity. I'd spent 15 years playing by rules that were designed to keep people like me in our place. Be professional, don't make waves, work twice as hard. Smile through the indignities. Prove you're one of the good ones. And where had it gotten me? To a point where two ignorant kids in a diner felt comfortable assaulting me because they assumed I was powerless. I thought about Susan Chen's offer to sue, and I thought about all the times I'd let things slide because pursuing justice seemed like more trouble than it was worth. I thought about the video that construction worker had sent me, clear evidence of assault. I thought about every Black woman who'd been mistreated and stayed silent because speaking up seemed too risky, too exhausting, too unlikely to change anything. And I made a decision. The next morning, I went to the police station and filed a report. The officer taking my statement was skeptical at first, asking me repeatedly if I was sure I wanted to press charges over just a drink. But I was a lawyer, and I knew how to make my case. I had evidence. I had witnesses. I had a clear record of discrimination and assault. "This isn't about a drink," I told the officer, a middle-aged white man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "This is about two people who thought they could assault someone with no consequences because of the color of her skin. So yes, I'm pressing charges." Then I did something I'd never done before. I went public. I posted the video on social media, along with a detailed account of what had happened. I named the diner, though I made sure to mention that the owner had immediately fired the employees and offered to make things right. I talked about the broader pattern of discrimination that Black people face in everyday situations, the constant microaggressions, and sometimes overt racism that we navigate just trying to exist in public spaces. Within 24 hours, the video had gone viral. Millions of views, tens of thousands of shares, the local news picking it up, then the national news. Brittany and Connor's faces were everywhere, their names published, their social media accounts uncovered, revealing exactly the kind of racist posts you'd expect. My phone was ringing constantly. Other lawyers offering to take the case pro bono. Civil rights organizations reaching out. People sharing their own stories of discrimination. And yes, the inevitable backlash, the people calling me a race baiter, saying I was playing the victim, that I should have just paid for the food and left quietly. But something interesting happened. The construction worker from the diner, whose name I learned was Mike Patterson, came forward publicly to corroborate my story. The elderly couple, Harold and Martha Stevens, gave interviews talking about what they'd witnessed. Other people who'd worked with Brittany and Connor at previous jobs came forward with their own stories of discrimination and harassment. And Susan Chen stood by her decision. She appeared on local news, not to defend herself or her business, but to condemn what had happened and call for real change in how service industry workers are trained and held accountable. She closed the diner for a week and instituted mandatory anti-discrimination training for all her staff. She set up a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in the food service industry. She turned her moment of shame into an opportunity for growth and education. The district attorney's office decided to prosecute. It wasn't a major case in the grand scheme of things, just a misdemeanor assault charge, but it was something. Brittany and Connor both pleaded guilty to avoid trial. They got community service, mandatory counseling, and criminal records that would follow them. Not life-destroying consequences, but consequences nonetheless. And I testified. I stood in that courtroom and told my story, not as a victim, but as a woman demanding accountability. I looked Brittany in the eye as I described the humiliation of having soda thrown in my face, the fear of being physically restrained, the accumulated weight of a lifetime of similar incidents that she represented in that moment. She cried during my testimony. Connor kept his head down, wouldn't look at me, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a tired kind of sadness that this was what it took for people to face minimal consequences for racism. But here's where the story takes a turn that I didn't expect. That made everything more complicated. 3 months after the trial, I got a letter. It was from Brittany, handwritten, several pages long. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. She started with an apology, which I expected. But then she did something unusual. She actually tried to explain, not excuse, but explain where her racism came from. She talked about growing up in a household where casual racism was normal, where her parents made jokes about Black people and immigrants and anyone different. She talked about the bubble she'd lived in, a small town where everyone looked like her, where her worldview was never challenged. She talked about social media echo chambers that reinforced her biases, making her believe that her prejudices were justified, even righteous. And then she talked about what happened after. How she'd lost not just her job but her apartment because the landlord didn't want the publicity. How her friends had abandoned her, some because they were disgusted by what she'd done, others because they were angry she got caught. How her family had split, with her grandmother cutting off contact and her younger sister telling her she was ashamed to share a last name. She talked about the mandatory counseling, which she'd expected to be a joke, but which had actually forced her to confront some painful truths about herself. About how she'd used racism as a way to feel superior when she felt powerless in her own life. About how hurting me had been a way to exercise control when she felt she had none. And she talked about Susan Chen, who had reached out to her after the trial, who had told her that one mistake, even a terrible one, didn't have to define her life, who had offered to pay for her to take some classes at the community college to work on herself to become better. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she wrote at the end. "I don't deserve it and I'm not entitled to it. I'm just asking you to know that what you did, fighting back, speaking up, it didn't just punish me. It woke me up. I'm 23 years old and I was already full of hate, and you showed me what that hate looks like when you're on the receiving end of it. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to unlearn everything I was taught, and I wanted you to know that." I read that letter 3 times, sitting in my office late at night, and I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to reject any attempt at redemption as too little too late. Part of me wanted to believe that people could change, that education and consequences could actually make a difference. I ended up doing something I still don't fully understand. I wrote back. Not a long letter, not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement. I told her that I appreciated her honesty, that I hoped she was sincere about changing, and that the best apology was changed behavior. I told her that racism wasn't just about individual bad actors, It was about systems and structures that needed to be dismantled. I told her that if she really wanted to make amends, she should dedicate herself to that work. And then I did something even more unexpected. I reached out to Susan Chen and asked if I could get involved in her scholarship program. Not as a figurehead or a spokesperson, but as a mentor. I wanted to work with young people from minority backgrounds who were entering the service industry to help prepare them for the discrimination they'd inevitably face, to teach them how to advocate for themselves, to show them that there were people who would stand with them. The program grew. Other lawyers from my firm got involved, offering pro bono services to service workers facing discrimination. Restaurant owners throughout Chicago joined Susan's training initiative. We created a network of support and accountability that reached beyond that one diner, that one incident. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. Not from what happened at Rosie's diner specifically, but from the accumulation of a lifetime of similar moments. Because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I was part of a community of people committed to change, to fighting back, to refusing to accept discrimination as just the price of existing in the world. About a year after the incident, Susan invited me to a reopening event at the diner. She'd renovated, updated the menu, and wanted to rededicate the space to its founding principles of community and inclusion. I almost didn't go. The thought of walking back into that space where I'd been so humiliated made my stomach turn. But I went, and when I walked through that door, I found a completely different atmosphere. The walls were covered with photos of the neighborhood, diverse faces of every age and race. There was a community board where people could post job opportunities, housing listings, resources for those in need. The menu had expanded to include dishes from different cultures, recipes contributed by regular customers. And there was a plaque on the wall near my old booth. It read, "In memory of Rosie Chen and in honor of all those who have faced discrimination in public spaces. May this establishment always be a place of welcome, respect, and dignity for everyone who enters." Susan found me staring at it, tears in my eyes. "Too much?" she asked quietly. "No," I managed. "It's perfect." We sat in that booth, the same one where I'd been humiliated, and she served me another club sandwich. This time, there were no cold fries, no hostile servers, no fear. Just two women who'd been through something difficult together and come out the other side changed. "I want to tell you something," Susan said. "After everything that happened, I thought about selling this place. I thought about just walking away, starting fresh somewhere else where I didn't have to carry the weight of what happened here. But then I realized that would be giving up. That would be letting the hatred win." "So what changed your mind?" "You did. The way you fought back, the way you demanded accountability, the way you turned your pain into action. You showed me that the answer to injustice isn't to run away or stay silent. It's to stand up and make things better." I smiled through my tears. "You gave me something too. You showed me that not everyone is complicit, that there are people who will do the right thing even when it costs them something. That hope isn't naive, it's necessary." As I left the diner that evening, my phone rang. It was one of my colleagues at the firm, calling about a new case. A young black man had been falsely accused of theft at a department store, arrested, humiliated in front of his children. He wanted to sue, wanted justice, and he'd asked specifically for me because he'd seen my story, seen how I'd fought back. I took the case. And then I took another and another. I started shifting my practice, using the skills I'd honed defending corporations to defend people instead. People who'd been discriminated against, harassed, assaulted for the crime of existing while black, while brown, while different. It didn't pay as well as corporate law. It was messier, more emotionally draining, harder to win. But it mattered in a way that patent disputes and merger negotiations never had. My daughter Patricia, who'd gone into public interest law straight out of school while I'd chased the big salary at corporate firms, called me one night after I'd won a particularly difficult discrimination case. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said. "I know it took something terrible to get you here, but I'm proud of who you're becoming." "I'm becoming who I should have been all along," I told her. "I just had to get soda thrown in my face to figure it out." She laughed, and then we both cried a little, and I realized that healing isn't linear. You don't just get over something like what happened to me, but you can transform it. You can take the pain and the humiliation and the anger and forge them into something useful, something that makes the world incrementally better. 5 years after that day at Rosie's diner, I was invited to speak at a conference on discrimination in public accommodations. The room was packed with lawyers, activists, business owners, all committed to creating change. And as I stood at that podium, looking out at all those faces, I thought about Brittany and Connor and that moment when my world fell apart. "I'm going to tell you something that might be controversial," I said. "I'm glad it happened." The room went quiet. Not glad that I was discriminated against. Not glad that I was assaulted. Not glad that I had to experience that level of humiliation and fear. But glad that I didn't stay silent. Glad that I fought back. Glad that I demanded accountability. Because that moment of pain became a catalyst for change, not just for me, but for everyone in my orbit. I told them about Susan Chen's training program, now implemented in over 200 restaurants across 5 states. About the 17 discrimination cases I'd won in the past 5 years, securing justice and compensation for people who'd been mistreated. About the scholarship program that had helped 38 minority students pursue careers in food service, armed with knowledge about their rights and support systems to back them up. "But here's the hard truth," I continued. "None of this should have been necessary. I shouldn't have had to become an activist to get basic respect. Susan Chen shouldn't have had to create anti-discrimination training to teach people not to be racist. We shouldn't have to fight this hard for basic human dignity. Yet here we are. And since we are here, since this is the world we live in, we have 2 choices. We can stay silent, try to avoid conflict, hope that if we just keep our heads down and work hard enough, we'll be okay, or we can fight back. We can demand better. We can use our voices, our resources, our privilege where we have it to create change. I spent 15 years choosing silence, choosing professionalism over justice, choosing comfort over confrontation. And it almost broke me. Because silence in the face of injustice doesn't protect you. It just makes you complicit in your own oppression. After the speech, dozens of people came up to share their own stories. A Korean restaurant owner who'd faced vandalism and harassment. A black lawyer who'd been followed by security in high-end stores despite being a paying customer. A Hispanic teenager who'd been refused service at a hotel. Story after story of casual cruelty and systemic racism. And each one of them asked me the same thing: what do I do? How do I fight back without it consuming my whole life? I didn't have a perfect answer. I still don't. But I told them what I'd learned. You fight in whatever way you can. You document everything. You demand accountability. You find your community and support each other. You don't have to become a full-time activist, but you do have to refuse to accept injustice as normal. And you have to take care of yourself. Because this work is exhausting. Fighting racism is exhausting. Existing while black, while brown, while different in a society that constantly others you is exhausting. So you rest when you need to. You celebrate the victories, even the small ones. You remember that change is incremental and you're playing a long game. One young woman, maybe 25, raised her hand. But what about forgiveness? What about reconciliation? Is there room for that? I thought about Brittany's letter, about the follow-up letters she'd sent over the years, updating me on her progress. About how she'd gone back to school, studying social work, dedicating her life to helping at-risk youth avoid the path she'd been on. About how she'd asked, 3 years in, if she could volunteer with the scholarship program, and how I'd said no, that wasn't appropriate, but how I'd respected her enough not to need my validation to continue her work. Forgiveness is personal, I said carefully. And it's complicated. I don't think we owe our oppressors forgiveness. I don't think reconciliation should come at the cost of accountability. But I do think people can change. I think education and consequences can make a difference. And I think there's room in this work for both holding people accountable and believing in the possibility of redemption. Just make sure that in seeking reconciliation, you're not being asked to minimize your own pain or accept less than you deserve. Forgiveness, if it comes, should be on your terms, in your time, if ever. The conference ended, and I flew back to Chicago exhausted but energized. This had become my life's work, not by choice exactly, but by necessity. By the simple fact that I couldn't unknow what I knew, couldn't unfeel what I'd felt, couldn't go back to pretending that everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. Susan Chen and I had dinner that week, like we did every month, a standing tradition we'd maintained over the years. Her diner was thriving, a real community space now, known as much for its inclusive atmosphere as for its food. She'd won awards, been featured in magazines, become a model for how to run an ethical business in the service industry. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked her. "Going so public, making such a big deal out of what happened. You could have just fired them quietly and moved on." She considered the question seriously, the way she always did. "I regret that it happened at all. I regret that you were hurt in my establishment, but I don't regret how I handled it, because staying quiet would have been easier for me, but it wouldn't have been right. And I think maybe that's the test of character, isn't it? Whether you choose what's right over what's easy." I raised my water glass to her. "To choosing what's right." "To choosing what's right," she echoed. If you're watching this, if you've stayed with me through this whole long story, I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment telling me your name and what city you're watching from. But more than that, I want you to tell me your story. Have you faced discrimination? Have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Have you witnessed injustice and looked away? There's no judgment here. I spent 15 years doing exactly that. But I also want you to know that it's never too late to start fighting back, to start demanding better, to start using whatever privilege and platform you have to create change. My name is Angela Price. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm a corporate attorney turned civil rights lawyer because two ignorant kids threw soda in my face and I decided I was done being silent. What's your story going to be? Because here's the truth that took me 43 years and a face full of soda to learn. Justice doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because we hope for it or wish for it or quietly endure injustice until things magically get better. Justice happens because people fight for it, because victims refuse to stay silent, because witnesses refuse to look away, because business owners like Susan Chen decide that principles matter more than profits. Because lawyers use their skills to defend the vulnerable instead of the powerful. Every single one of us has a choice to make, every single day. Do we accept the world as it is, with all its injustice and cruelty and casual racism? Or do we fight to make it better, knowing that the fight is long and hard and we might not see the fruits of our labor in our lifetime? I choose to fight, not because I'm brave or special or particularly noble, but because staying silent almost destroyed me and fighting back saved my life. So fight back, in whatever way you can, with whatever resources you have. Document the discrimination, report the racism, support the victims, hold the perpetrators accountable. Don't let them get away with it just because fighting seems hard, because it is hard. But silence is harder. Complicity is harder. Living with the knowledge that you could have made a difference but chose not to is harder. 5 years ago, I walked into a diner for a simple lunch and walked out a different person. Not because of what happened to me, but because of what I chose to do about it. I could have stayed silent, accepted Susan's apology and the settlement money she would have gladly given me, and moved on with my life. But I chose differently. And that choice rippled out in ways I never could have anticipated, touching hundreds of lives, creating real change in my community. Your choice can do the same. Your voice matters, your story matters, your refusal to accept injustice matters. So tell your story, fight your fight, change your corner of the world. And remember, when they throw soda in your face, you don't have to just wipe it off and walk away. You can demand accountability. You can seek justice. You can transform your pain into purpose. That's what I did. And 5 years later, I'm still doing it. Still fighting. Still believing that change is possible. Still standing.